millionaire is shocked to see his son calm after a black homeless man finds a crying baby. Richard Stokes never expected to freeze in place on a sunny afternoon in Central Park. The sharp suit he wore felt like a suit of armor, cold, rigid, protecting him from any sign of weakness. But there he was, heart pounding, eyes locked on a startling scene that shattered the perfect bubble he'd built with money and power. Across the manicured lawn, just steps from a marble bench where Louis Vuitton bags lay forgotten, a black homeless man crouched slowly over something small and fragile. His face was weathered, cracked by years of hard living, but his eyes held a calm certainty that stopped the world for a moment. In his shaking hands, a tiny, wailing baby wrapped in threadbare cloth. People around had started to gather, whispering, gasping. The usual polished joggers and suited executives looked stunned, unsure what to do. Murmurs. "It's okay," Ethan said, voice steady. "We'll help you. What's your name?" The man looked up, surprised, then smiled faintly. "Solomon," he said. Something about that name gripped Richard, an echo from a past he'd tried to bury beneath deals, dollars, and cold boardroom lights. Richard's chest tightened. The noise in the park faded. He saw Ethan's calm kindness shine where he had only ever seen weakness in a homeless man. The crowd's shock twisted into whispers of admiration and judgment. Behind Richard, his partner Greg poked him sharply on the arm, eyes hard. "You need to shut this down, now. This story leaks, it kills us." The urgency in Greg's voice was sharp as a knife. Reputation was everything. Compassion was a liability. Greg expected Richard to bury the moment, like every messy human thing he disliked. But Richard's hands trembled. His mind raced as memories of Solomon, a man who had once thrown him a lifeline when Richard was sinking, collided with the scene in front of him. This wasn't just about a baby. It was about everything he'd ignored. His son's heart, his own past, the cost of a life built on ruthless ambition. Could he afford to face what this moment demanded? To redefine success when his empire's foundation was cracked? Or would he keep the cold mask, pushing away the shame and the fear? As Ethan gently lifted the crying baby, Solomon's eyes locked with Richard's, a silent question hanging between them. A weight Richard could no longer ignore. The crowd held its breath. The city's hum dimmed. And in that park, under the sharp sunlight and the watchful eyes of strangers, Richard Stokes felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Hey, before you continue with this incredible story, I have an important warning for you. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without warning. Take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any exclusive content. And while you're there, leave that powerful like. It helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I love meeting all the amazing people who are part of this community. Your participation makes a difference. Let's interact. Ethan stood up, with the baby cradled in his arms, his heart pounding in sync with the whispers around him. Solomon, still kneeling, looked up at him, relief flooding his features. The crowd, once filled with confusion, began to soften, their gasps replaced by a cautious admiration. Richard watched, stunned, as Ethan's gentle spirit broke through layers of his carefully crafted ind. A sleek, black SUV barreled into the park, tires screeching against the pavement. Richard's breath hitched as the vehicle swerved, barely missing the marble bench. People scattered, screaming, stumbling over each other in sheer panic. Richard's instincts kicked in. "Ethan, get back!" he shouted, but the words felt distant, muffled by chaos. He took a step forward, heart racing, but froze as he recognized the figures jumping out of the SUV. Men in dark suits, faces grim with purpose. One of them, a tall man with slicked back hair, pointed directly at Solomon, fury etched across his features. "There he is! Grab him!" The word grab felt like a tightening noose around Richard's throat. "Stay down!" Richard yelled, and in that moment, it seemed time slowed. Everyone's eyes were glued to the scene, breaths held in shock. Ethan instinctively held the baby closer. "Please, stop!" he cried out, but the men were already rushing forward, shoving past bystanders with harsh, rough hands. Richard's mind raced. What on earth did they want with Solomon? The reality of the moment slammed into him like a freight train. Solomon wasn't just an innocent man struggling in the street. He was a target for something hidden, something dark. "Mister!" Solomon shouted, standing quickly, surprisingly agile for a man who had lived on the streets. "I didn't do anything wrong." Richard felt his skin crawl. Was Solomon on the run? But before he could process any more thoughts, one of the men lunged at Solomon, grabbing his arm, pulling him away from the ground where he had been kneeling. "No!" Ethan screamed, desperately trying to push the man away. "Let him go!" In the chaos, Richard rushed forward, propelled by a fierce protectiveness he didn't realize he still had. "Stop! He hasn't done anything!" But the man with the slicked-back hair turned, his cold eyes locking onto Richard's. "This doesn't concern you, Stokes. You don't want to get involved." Richard's insides twisted. How did this man know his name? What did he mean by concern? Suddenly, a wild voice pierced through, a woman standing on a bench, her face flushed with outrage. "He's just a homeless man! Let him go!" The crowd erupted in a murmur of conflicting emotions: fear, sympathy, anger. "What are they doing? Someone needs to stop this. Is this legal?" Before Richard could respond, Solomon's expression shifted. "Ethan!" he yelled, panic whipping through his voice. "Get away! They're not who you think they are!" The revelation struck like lightning. Richard's heart sank. What did Solomon know? What secrets were wrapped in that childlike face of his? Then, just as quickly as it began, chaos erupted again. An explosion rocked the park, a plume of smoke billowing from the SUV, sending people shrieking and scattering. In that moment, Richard glimpsed a truth that twisted his heart. Nothing was what it seemed. The baby, the man, everything was intertwined in a web of mystery and danger. Richard's eyes darted, searching for Ethan in the mad scramble of bodies. "Ethan, where are you?" But the little boy had vanished in the chaos, swallowed by fear. Richard felt his insides drop. What if he didn't just lose a son today? What if he lost everything? The question burned in his throat. What was this life worth if it meant losing his only child? Richard's heart raced, a drumbeat of panic in his chest as he scanned the chaos around him. The smoke from the SUV swirled like a dark omen, and the echoes of screams rattled his bones. "Ethan, where are you?" he shouted again, fighting through bodies that surged like a wild ocean. He pushed past a group of terrified onlookers, his eyes darting, searching. A gripping fear clawed at him. He couldn't lose his son. Not like this. Where could he have gone? Had those men taken him? "Ethan!" Panic twisted in his throat, blending with the acrid smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. He stumbled, nearly tripping over a backpack left forgotten in the frenzy. Every second felt heavy, dragging him deeper into dread. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Richard saw a flash of movement near a cluster of tall trees. He strained through the haze. There he was, a small figure, crouched low, cradling the baby. Ethan. Relief flooded Richard's chest like a rush of fresh air. But as he pushed toward them, something shifted in the air. The energy of the crowd morphed, from fear to shock. People gasped, eyes wide, as they turned to face a new threat. Out from beneath the SUV, a hidden panel slid open, revealing armed men in tactical gear. They poured out, weapons drawn. Richard's stomach dropped. "Get down!" he yelled, diving toward Ethan, pulling him to the ground just as shots rang out. Bang! Bang! The world exploded into chaos again, the shots jarring Richard's chest. Solomon was still on the ground, shouting, "Ethan, stay down!" Richard's heart raced, carving through sheer instinct as he shielded his son and the baby. Then, in a shocking twist of fate, a voice boomed through the pandemonium. "Stop shooting. I have what you want." The crowd parted like an unwilling sea, revealing a woman striding forward with confidence, her arms raised. Who is she? Richard thought. Confusion mingling with urgency. The woman had dark hair and a fierce gaze. It was the woman on the bench. She was muttering something, her eyes locked onto the armed men, as if she held power over them. "You know what I have. I can help you." Ethan's grip on the baby tightened, but the overwhelming tension hung thick. Murmurs of disbelief swept through the crowd. Suddenly, the tactical men hesitated, their weapons wavering. In that moment of uncertainty, Richard felt a crack in the universe, a connection between them all, a hidden truth waiting to emerge. "Who are you?" one of the men demanded, his voice strained. The woman smirked, eyes flashing. "You know who I am, and you know what you're truly after." What could she possibly have? Richard thought, glancing at Solomon, who looked equally mystified. Had this woman been connected to their lives all along? Something snapped in Richard's mind. Secrets forged in the shadows. The woman raised her hand, revealing an object that glittered dangerously under sunlight. It was a small, metallic sphere, almost like an orb. "Your lives depend on this, don't they?" she taunted, her voice laced with challenge. The very air turned electric. Richard felt the weight of countless possibilities, each choice vibrating with uncertainty, swirling around them. What was it? Could it be the key to everything, to the chaos unfolding? And as she stepped closer, the orb gleaming in her palm, Richard understood. Everything was suddenly on the line. His son, Solomon, even his own identity, hung by a thread. He can't have gotten away with all of this, Richard's thoughts screamed. But why did he suddenly feel like the true target? "Stay close, Ethan," he shouted, though he felt his grip loosening. "Richard!" Solomon yelled, pulling his attention away from the unfolding storm. "We need to get out of here." But the question buzzed in Richard's mind. What was she really offering? And what would it cost? Ethan stepped closer to the woman, fear mingling with curiosity as she still held the shimmering orb. "What do you want?" he blurted, his voice trembling. Richard's chest tightened as he moved to shield him further. "Ethan, stay behind me," Richard snapped, adrenaline pumping through his veins. The tension snapped like a taut wire. The armed men shifted nervously, their eyes darting between the woman and Solomon. Everyone remained on edge, breaths held. "Don't hurt him!" Richard yelled, desperation clawing at his throat. The woman looked back, her fierce gaze meeting Richard's eyes. "If they want Solomon, they'll need this first," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. A heavy silence enveloped the park. The world felt still, the chaos of sirens far away, as if they were caught in a moment frozen in time. Richard's heart raced. What did she know? What was she hiding? Then, without warning, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble echoed through the park, as if the earth was shaking with anticipation. Richard's eyes widened, confusion washing over him, then morphed into panic when the ground cracked open nearby. A jagged fissure split the earth, exposing a dark void deep beneath. The crowd gasped, recoiling from the split. "What the hell is happening?" someone shouted, their voice a mix of shock and fear. The armed men were thrown off balance, glancing at each other, uncertainty flashing across their faces. Suddenly, the fissure erupted, a blinding light shooting upwards like a beacon. Richard fell back instinctively, his arms flinging around Ethan protectively. And then, from that blinding light, a figure emerged, a woman draped in a cloak of shimmering fabric that caught the sunlight like rippling water. She stepped forward with an air of authority, her face partially obscured by a hood. "Stop," she commanded, voice strong, echoing around them. The armed men hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly. Richard's heart pounded. He felt a strange connection to the woman. It was as if something was pulling at the fibers of his memory. For a flicker, everything shifted. Richard's past crumbled into focus, and clarity washed over him. That voice, he knew it. "Rachel?" he whispered, disbelief sending chills down his spine. The woman turned slowly, pulling back her hood, revealing a face that felt both familiar and foreign. "Yes, Richard," she replied, eyes shimmering with depth. "It's me. I never thought I would find you like this." Gasps filled the air. Ethan looked between them, confusion etched on his small face. But before Richard could speak, before he could comprehend the enormity of this moment, Rachel lifted her hand. The orb in her palm gleamed, pulsing with light as she commanded, "They don't want Solomon. They want what's in here." "What's in it?" Richard asked, his voice low, trembling. "It's a key," she replied, the heavy weight of her words sinking in. "But it unlocks more than you could ever imagine." The armed men shifted uncomfortably, wariness replaced by a strange fascination. The crowd murmured, captivated by the unfolding drama, uncertainty ebbing from shock to curiosity. Raymond, one of the men, squinted, brow furrowing. "You're lying." "What do you know?" Rachel stepped forward boldly. "I know more than you can handle. This doesn't involve you." Her words held a power that resonated in the air. Richard felt it wrap around him like a cocoon, the familiar touch of lost love, mingling with familial bonds, testing their strength. Slowly, everything he believed began to crumble. "You disappeared, Rachel. What are you doing here? Why now?" She opened her mouth to respond, but before a word could escape, the fissure roared and the ground shook again. "What's happening?" Ethan cried out, alarm etched on his youthful face. Richard's world tilted. Everything hit him all at once. Secrets buried deep. Decisions that rippled through time. Choices he never really made. As the light from the fissure grew brighter, Richard felt a jolt of recognition. In an instant, pieces clicked together, unraveling not just his life, but the very fabric of their reality. "Richard, you need to trust me," Rachel urged, urgency rushing through her voice. But it was too late. The ground beneath Solomon buckled, pulling him downward. And as Richard lunged forward, desperation filling his every move, the reality shifted one last time. Time froze again as he reached for Solomon's wrist, his heart hammering. "No, I won't lose you." Then the world spun out of control, the light swallowing everything, plunging them into a darkness that felt alive with questions. What had he just uncovered? What lay in the depths? And who was truly at the center of it all? As the light engulfed them, Richard felt an overwhelming surge of emotions. Panic danced with desperation, gripping his heart. He was just inches away from Solomon, ready to pull him back from that dark void. But then, everything went white, and Richard's world vanished. In an instant, the brilliance faded, and they found themselves in a completely different place. The park had disappeared, replaced by a vast emptiness. Richard blinked, confusion enveloping him. Ethan clutched the baby tightly, his eyes wide, reflecting fear and uncertainty. "Where are we?" Ethan's voice trembled, breaking the eerie silence that surrounded them. "I don't know," Richard replied, scanning the endless landscape stretching in every direction. It felt so surreal, like a scene from a movie, but it was all too real. A cold sweat formed on his brow. But before they could process their surroundings, Solomon's voice cut through the stillness. This was bound to happen. His tone was somber, almost resigned. "I tried to warn you." "Warn us about what?" Richard demanded, the urgency in his voice rising. He was not ready for any more surprises. Solomon's gaze drifted towards the horizon. A line of darkness loomed there, shifting ominously. "What's coming is nothing we can fight," Solomon said quietly. Richard could see the fright etched on Solomon's face, shadows dancing in his eyes. The implication hung between them like a dark cloud. Then, without warning, the ground shook violently. Richard lost his balance, and Ethan stumbled, barely keeping the baby safe. "Hold on!" Richard shouted as he reached for Ethan again, pulling him closer. In that moment, the men in tactical gear from before reappeared, filing in from the darkness. Facing them, this time, they wore expressions of pure fury, mingled with fear. "You weren't supposed to make it this far," one of them shouted, voice thick with disbelief. Richard's pulse quickened. Was this part of the plan? "Make what far?" he roared back, feeling the weight of confusion turn into anger. The armed men weren't the only ones closing in. Shadows began to swirl around them, dark shapes creeping closer, each movement seeming to pulse with a life of its own. Rachel stepped forward, the shimmering orb still clasped in her hand. "You don't understand," she cried out. "This realm is a portal, and they've been waiting for a signal. Their time is now." Richard felt a thread of betrayal twist in his gut. "So you brought us here? You knew?" "It's not what you think," Rachel pleaded, desperation threading her words. "If they claim Solomon, it brings everything to an end. I had to use the orb as a lure." Then the ground cracked again, more violently this time. Everything tilted, and suddenly, a piercing light shot from the darkness, revealing a hideous figure, disfigured and looming with a hungry gaze, drawing nearer. Richard's breath hitched. "What the hell is that?" he gasped. "I don't know," Solomon screamed, his voice blending with the rising chaos. "They feed off fear. That's why I had to survive. It's why I've been hiding." Ethan's fragile grip snapped, and the baby slipped from his arms. Time froze. Richard's heart raced as he watched its tiny body tumble toward the dark entity, an offering meant to appease the lurking terror. "No!" Richard shouted, lunging forward. In that pulse of fear and desperation, realization hit him all at once. Everything had been interconnected in ways he'd never fathomed. The homeless man, the crying baby, his son. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was a convergence, a desperate act trying to sway the balance of what kind of darkness was rising. "Stop!" he yelled again, voice hoarse. "You don't have to take anyone," We can fight this together." But the dark figure seemed to laugh, a sound chilling enough to freeze Richard's blood. The truth hit him with an icy grip. There was no fighting this. As the crescent of shadows tightened around them, a loud boom echoed in the air. Richard felt the tangible force of a blast, like a wave, pushing them back. And then everything erupted. Fire and ash mingled with screams, engulfing them in chaos. Nothing was as it seemed anymore. The implications twisted the very fabric of Richard's world. As smoke clouded their vision, he heard Rachel's voice cutting through. "Richard, find the key before it's too late." But what key? What did she mean? And had they truly delved into something they couldn't escape? The light dimmed, swallowed by encroaching shadows. Richard's grip tightened around Ethan, pulling him close. A dark present loomed around them, and as hope flickered, Richard's heart ached with urgency. What was he expected to do next? Would they all survive? Or had they unwittingly stepped into a trap where no one could be saved? As the light dimmed and shadows closed in, Richard felt like he was in a nightmare that would never end. He tightened his grip around Ethan, pulling him close as panic clawed at his chest. The dark figure loomed larger, feeding off the fear thick in the air. "Mommy!" Ethan cried, clutching the baby protectively. "I want to go home!" Richard's heart shattered a little more. "I'm right here, buddy. Just hang on." Rachel stepped forward again. "You have to trust me, Richard. It's the orb." But before she could finish, the shadows raced towards them, swirling like a storm. In a sudden explosion of sound, the ground quaked again, jagged cracks shooting out like lightning from the dark void. Richard's heart raced, his breathing quick and shallow. "Stay back," he yelled at the advancing darkness. Then came a blinding flash. A flash so bright, it momentarily blinded everyone. People shielded their eyes, the crowd gasping as the light washed over them. Richard squinted, trying to find Ethan through the brightness. And then, silence. When the light finally faded, Richard felt a shift. A sudden shift in everything around him. Confusion hung heavy like a thick fog. Where was the nothingness, the darkness? He blinked, and then he understood. They were no longer in the dark void. They were somewhere else. The park had transformed into a vibrant street fair, bustling with people, colorful banners fluttering, laughter ringing out in the air. Children ran past with balloons. Food vendors called to passers-by, and the sun shone radiantly. But even amidst the joy, a chilling sense of wrongness settled in Richard's stomach. "What just happened?" he breathed, looking around in disbelief. "Is this real?" I think so," Ethan whispered, wide-eyed. Then Richard felt it. A familiar hand on his shoulder. He turned, heart racing. Greg, his business partner, stood there, looking just the same, his suit perfectly pressed. But there was something different about him. An eerie calm washed over Greg's face as he adjusted his tie. "Richard, we need to talk," he said smoothly. "Talk about what?" Richard demanded, his voice rising. "What the hell is this place? Where's Solomon? Where's Rachel?" "Solomon?" Rachel? Greg smirked, his eyes glinting with something sinister. You really don't get it, do you? This is what you wished for, Richard. A perfect world, with no consequences. A jolt of confusion struck Richard. What are you talking about? Suddenly, a flashback hit him. A memory buried deep. The last time he saw Greg, just before everything changed. The frantic arguments, the shady deals, the truth sank in like a lead weight. Wait, this isn't just a coincidence, Richard stammered, realization dawning. You brought us here, didn't you? Greg laughed, a sharp, cold sound. You were always so naive. This world is a byproduct of your ambition, a reward for playing the game, but only if you stay in line. What do you mean, stay in line? Richard's voice began to tremble, the pieces snapping into place like a jigsaw puzzle he didn't want to see. You and your precious son trapped here forever, unless you accept the terms, Greg sneered, stepping closer. Solomon, a pawn. Rachel, a distraction. I've played you both beautifully. Richard staggered back, his heart racing in panic. This was a trap, an elaborate deception. Everything he thought he knew turned upside down. Why had he never seen it before? No, Richard, Greg said softly, his eyes piercing through Richard's defenses. You just didn't want to see. But know this. Every choice you've made has led you here, and it's time to choose again. Before Richard could respond, the vibrant fairground around them flickered, the colors darkening, twisting under the weight of truth. In that moment, the shadows returned, creeping back in, hungry for the fear that now filled the air again. And as chaos erupted around them once more, Richard realized, with a crushing despair, that this wasn't just about keeping his son safe. It was about confronting the demons of his own making. Ethan, stick close, Richard shouted. But could he even protect him from this? Because now, undeniable truth hung heavy in the air, and as the shadows lunged once more, Richard asked himself the chilling question: what if he was the real monster in this story? As the shadows lunged forward, Richard felt a rush of adrenaline course through him. Get down! He shut his eyes tight, bracing for the inevitable chaos. But then the air cracked like thunder, and a blinding flash erupted from the fissure. He shielded Ethan, feeling the ground tremble beneath them. The shadows hesitated, recoiling from the light like a vampire from the dawn. And then, in an overwhelming surge of brightness, they appeared, a group of figures materializing from the radiance. Richard squinted, trying to make sense of it all. The faces were blurry at first, but as the light subsided, recognition slammed into him like a freight train. Mom? Ethan gasped, eyes widening in disbelief. Richard turned, his heart racing. It was her, Rachel, standing there, a smile blossoming on her face. But it wasn't just Rachel. Behind her, his wife, Linda, looking as radiant as the day he married her. And there stood his parents, too, all of them as if time had leaped back to when he had last seen them. What's happening? Richard sputtered, confusion swirling within him. How are you here? You shouldn't be here. but the joy in Linda's eyes dimmed slightly. "We came for you, Richard. You need to understand." Across from them, Greg's expression changed, the smirk replacing with unease, shocked disbelief morphing to horror. "No, it can't be," he stammered. Richard felt a sharp pang of betrayal at the sight of Greg's faltering bravado. "You knew!" he roared, pointing a finger, every instinct screaming at him to protect his family. Suddenly, the dark figure before them spoke, its voice echoing like thunder. "You think this is a happy reunion? Their lives are not what they seem." Richard glanced back at his loved ones, uncertainty spiraling within him. "What do you mean?" "They're part of the illusion," the figure hissed with a twisted grin. "They're not really here, Richard. They were never really alive." A chill gripped Richard's chest, the world around him fading. "No, that's not true," he gasped. "No." Greg laughed, the sound harsh and sharp against the backdrop of confusion. "You could never accept the truth. Could you? You see what you want to see." Richard's eyes darted back to his family. They seemed frozen, smiles unfaltering but lifeless, as if moved by puppet strings. "Stop it!" he shouted, voice cracking with despair. "Stop this!" "Richard." Rachel's voice was soft, yet shadowed by an eerie undertone. "You made a choice. A deal was struck. You traded reality for power." The ground shook once more, and this time the shadows surged forward, swarming like a dark tide. Richard felt the air shift. His memories, once vibrant, turned hollow, empty. The laughter of his children, the warmth of their home, all the moments he cherished, felt more like dust scattered in the wind. "No," he shouted, clinging to the illusion, heart pounding. "You can't take them from me." "But they were never yours to begin with," the dark figure hissed, transforming into a beckoning shadow. Just then, the orb in Rachel's hand flickered to life, pulsating with a fierce illumination. It cast a bright light, and in that moment, Richard saw flashes, his past, his choices, each decision that had brought him to this point. Every act of selfishness, every moment he had put business over family, every time he turned a blind eye, it all flashed before him. "Don't let it take you!" Rachel cried, desperation lining her voice. "Fight it!" But just as hope flickered in Richard's heart, the shadows twisted around him, pulling him down, deeper and deeper. The last thing he saw was Ethan's terrified face, eyes wide, mouth forming a silent plea for help. And then, nothing, a vast void. Richard wasn't sure. Questions spiraled, dark doubts wrapping around him. Were they real? Were they gone? Had he lost everything? But then a new feeling emerged, anger mixed with clarity. What if he could break their hold? What if that flicker of light from Rachel's orb held the very key to everything? And could he find a way back? A voice echoed in the void, familiar and haunting. "Richard, you must remember." His heart raced, realization crashing over him like a wave. He needed to confront not just the darkness, but the truth about himself, and the shocking truth that he might be the one who summoned it all. As the shadows beckoned him back, Richard steeled himself, determined to uncover the mystery of his choices. What kind of man had he become? What had he truly sacrificed? And most importantly, was there still a chance to save Ethan and reclaim what was lost? The darkness swirled again, pulling him deeper. The path ahead unfolded, revealing a new chapter. A choice that could redefine everything. And as he took a breath, the question hung in the air. Who would Richard become if he found a way back? As the shadows lunged forward, Richard felt a rush of adrenaline course through him. "Get down!" he shouted, pulling Ethan tighter against him. The darkness swirled with a hunger that made Richard's skin prickle with fear. He shut his eyes tight, bracing for the inevitable chaos. But then the air cracked like thunder, and a blinding flash erupted from the fissure. He shielded Ethan, feeling the ground tremble beneath them. The shadows hesitated, recoiling from the light like a vampire from dawn. In that moment of blinding brilliance, everything around them morphed. The fairground vanished, leaving behind an expanse of shimmering light. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the light faded. Richard's heart thudded in his chest as he looked around. They were now in a vast white room, the walls shifting and alive, pulsating as if responding to their fear. A figure materialized from the haze, tall and imposing, cloaked in a glimmering fabric. It stepped forward, and Richard's heart sank. It was the familiar silhouette of someone he thought he'd lost long ago, his mother. "Mom," he choked out, disbelief washing over him like a tidal wave. "But how?" "Richard," she said softly, stepping closer, "you've forgotten us. You've forgotten your true self." Ethan looked between Richard and this apparition, confusion flooding his innocent face. "Dad, what's happening? Is she real?" Before Richard could answer, another figure appeared, his father, eyes filled with an intense sadness. "It's time for the truth, son. You have to remember." "Remember what?" Richard snapped, frustration mingling with hope. "I need to know. Where's Solomon? Where's Rachel?" "They're part of the illusion," his mother replied, her voice steady, yet laced with urgency. "You're caught in a web of your own making. Your choices brought you here." "No, you don't understand," Richard shouted back, fury welling inside him. "I did this to protect my family." Suddenly, the room began to tremble, shifting under their feet. The walls rippled, revealing flashes of moments from Richard's past. Business meetings, moments of triumph, and every time he had chosen ambition over family. Each memory hit him like a punch in the gut. "Look at what you've sacrificed," his father cried, pain etched on his face. Just then, a deep roar echoed in the chamber. Shadows crept back, swirling around them, hungry and relentless. Richard felt the oppressive weight of their darkness closing in. "Stop! Leave us alone!" he yelled, desperate. But the shadows embraced the figures of his parents, pulling them into a void. "No. Mom? Dad? Come back!" And then it struck him. The truth he had been blind to all along. His breath caught as the shadows transformed, taking on familiar forms, faces of everyone he had crossed during his relentless pursuit of success. Each one represented a life ruined by his choices. "No, this can't be," he muttered, slowly understanding the magnitude of what he had done. The truth was unraveling, dragging him deeper. Suddenly, the shadows retreated, and Rachel stepped into the room, a shaky smile on her face. But this time, she wasn't alone. Solomon stood beside her, looking more radiant than Richard had ever seen. "It's time to reclaim what you've lost," Rachel said, extending her hand toward Richard. Confused, Richard looked from Rachel to Solomon. "What do you mean?" "Everything you sought to protect is right here, Richard," Solomon said, voice echoing with compassion. "But you must confront the monster you've created first." In a heartbeat, the air thickened, and Richard's heart stopped. It hit him like a lightning bolt. The dark figure loomed again, transforming into the person he trusted most, Greg. "Richard, you're still in my grasp." Greg's smug voice dripped with malice. "You thought you could escape. But everything you see, it's all my design." "No!" Richard screamed, realization crashing over him. The darkness swirled, shadows feeding off the fractured light within him. Greg grinned, revealing his true nature. "I'm the one who orchestrated your fall. I gave you the illusion of choice while tightening my grip. And now, you'll never escape." Richard felt his world shatter. As the room twisted into chaos, shadows swirling wildly around them, he had to decide: fight this darkness or surrender to the very monster he had created. "Stay close, Ethan," he shouted, drawing his son to his side. But as the shadows tightened, pieces of his past unfurled, each choice echoing with consequences. The question hung heavy in the air. Would Richard manage to break free from Greg's manipulation, or would he lose everything to the darkness he helped create? As the shadows lunged forward, Richard felt a rush of adrenaline course through him. "Get down!" he shouted, pulling Ethan tighter against him. The darkness swirled with a hunger that made Richard's skin prickle with fear. He shut his eyes tight, bracing for the inevitable chaos. But then the air cracked like thunder, and a blinding flash erupted from the fissure, shielded Ethan, feeling the ground tremble beneath them. The shadows hesitated, recoiling from the light like a vampire from dawn. In that moment of blinding brilliance, everything around them morphed. The fairground vanished, leaving behind an expanse of shimmering light. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the light faded. Richard's heart thudded in his chest as he looked around. They were now in a vast white room, the walls shifting and alive, pulsating as if responding to their fear. A figure materialized from the haze, tall and imposing, cloaked in a glimmering fabric. It stepped forward, and Richard's heart sank. It was the familiar silhouette of someone he thought he'd lost long ago, his mother. "Mom?" he choked out, disbelief washing over him like a tidal wave. "But how?" "Richard," she said softly, stepping closer, "you've forgotten us. You've forgotten your true self." Ethan looked between Richard and this apparition, confusion flooding his innocent face. "Dad, what's happening? Is she real?" Before Richard could answer, another figure appeared. His father, eyes filled with an intense sadness. "It's time for the truth, son. You have to remember." "Remember what?" Richard snapped, frustration mingling with hope. "I need to know. Where's Solomon? Where's Rachel?" "They're part of the illusion," his mother replied, her voice steady yet laced with urgency. "You're caught in a web of your own making. Your choices brought you here." "No, you don't understand," Richard shouted back, fury welling inside him. "I did this to protect my family." Suddenly, the room began to tremble, shifting under their feet. The walls rippled, revealing flashes of moments from Richard's past. Business meetings, moments of triumph, and every time he had chosen ambition over family. Each memory hit him like a punch in the gut. "Look at what you've sacrificed," his father cried, pain etched on his face. Just then, a deep roar echoed in the chamber. Shadows crept back, swirling around them, hungry and relentless. Richard felt the oppressive weight of their darkness closing in. "Stop! Leave us alone!" he yelled, desperate. But the shadows embraced the figures of his parents, pulling them into a void. "No! Mom! Dad! Come back!" And then it struck him. The truth he had been blind to all along. His breath caught as the shadows transformed, taking on familiar forms, faces of everyone he had crossed during his relentless pursuit of success. Each one represented a life ruined by his choices. "No, this can't be," he muttered, slowly understanding the magnitude of what he had done. The truth was unraveling, dragging him deeper. Suddenly, the shadows retreated, and Rachel stepped into the room, a shaky smile on her face. But this time, she wasn't alone. Solomon stood beside her, looking more radiant than Richard had ever seen. "It's time to reclaim what you've lost," Rachel said, extending her hand toward Richard. Confused, Richard looked from Rachel to Solomon. "What do you mean?" "Everything you sought to protect is right here, Richard," Solomon said, voice echoing with compassion. "But you must confront the monster you've created first." In a heartbeat, the air thickened, and Richard's heart stopped. It hit him like a lightning bolt. The dark figure loomed again, transforming into the person he trusted most, Greg. "Richard, you're still in my grasp." Greg's smug voice dripped with malice. "You thought you could escape, but everything you see, it's all my design." "No!" Richard screamed, realization crashing over him. The darkness swirled, shadows feeding off the fractured light within him. Greg grinned, revealing his true nature. "I'm the one who orchestrated your fall. I gave you the illusion of choice while tightening my grip. And now, you'll never escape." Richard felt his world shatter. As the room twisted into chaos, shadows swirling wildly around them, he had to decide: fight this darkness or surrender to the very monster he had created. "Stay close, Ethan," he shouted, drawing his son to his side. But as the shadows tightened, pieces of his past unfurled, each choice echoing with consequences. The question hung heavy in the air. Would Richard manage to break free from Greg's manipulation? Or would he lose everything to the darkness he helped create? Then, without warning, a blinding light pierced through the chaos, illuminating Greg's face. "You thought you could win?" he yelled, eyes wide with panic. "You don't even know what you're really capable of." Richard squinted against the light, dread pooling in his stomach. A resonance filled the air, deep and vibrating, as if the very fabric of reality was stretching. "Enough!" boomed a voice from the light, overwhelming and familiar. Richard gasped, blood running cold. It was his own voice, echoing with power. Suddenly, the shadows stilled, retreating as the light expanded. Richard felt the surge of energy coursing through him, a heavy weight lifting. He could feel memories, powerful visions, flashing through him. "Richard, you're stronger than this," echoed his own voice within the light. "Break the cycle. Choose differently." I can't," he shouted, desperation clawing at him. But the light surged again, revealing a shocking truth. "You're not just a victim, Richard. You're the architect of your own reality." In that moment, everything shifted. Richard grasped the orb in Rachel's hand, feeling a wave of uncharacteristic courage wash over him. But it was more than courage. It was dawning clarity. "Greg, you're right," Richard whispered, trembling with revelation. "I made these choices. But what if I choose to rewrite them?" With that resolve, a crack shattered open within Richard. The room erupted, shadows roared with fury, and an overwhelming force surged through him. Light exploded outward, tearing through the darkness with a ferocity that shook the very universe. And just as light enveloped him completely, he saw it, a glimpse of the truth, buried deep. The reality of everyone's lives intertwined, sinuous threads revealing another story, a deeper level, a world beyond. Before it all faded into brilliance, Richard realized the choices were never just his, but part of a bigger design, an intricate web with consequences beyond anything he'd ever comprehended. What did it mean? Was Greg just a player in a game far bigger than both of them? And if we're all players in this vast game, who else holds the strings? As the light began to dim, Richard felt the weight of the unknown settle in. The stakes had changed. Everything he thought he understood was just the beginning of a much darker mystery unfolding. The brightness enveloped Richard, and he could feel the warmth wash over him, soul deep. This moment was a crossroads, a choice laid bare in front of him. Would he accept the truth, the goodness within him, and fight back against the darkness, or would he let the shadows consume him, just as they had always threatened to do? As the comforting light pulsed, Richard squared his shoulders. He looked at Ethan, who clutched the baby tightly, eyes shining with a mix of fear and faith. "I'm here, buddy. We can do this together." The words filled him with a new strength. "I believe in you, Dad," Ethan said, his voice unwavering. Richard felt a rush of love that surged through his very core. In that instant, He turned to face the shadowy figure of Greg, who stood defiantly, a twisted smirk dancing on his lips. "You think you've broken free? You're still stuck in my trap." A new resolve washed over Richard. "No, Greg, this ends now." He stepped forward, feeling the energy of his family surrounding him, the love binding them stronger than any dark deception ever could. With a deep breath, Richard lifted the orb, feeling its warmth surge through him. "I'm reclaiming my life. I choose love over fear." The words exploded from his mouth like a shout of thunder, echoing through the shifting landscape. The orb blazed brighter, and the shadows screeched as if in pain. They writhed, contorting and twisting, struggling against the light. Richard held firm, his grip steady. He could feel the ancient weight of his choices tumbling away, leaving room for hope that was ever present beneath the surface. "Together!" Rachel shouted, joining him, her voice resonating with power. Solomon echoed beside her, "Together!" The light cascaded, merging into a fiery wave that surged towards the dark figure. Greg's sneer warped into anger, then fear, as it rushed over him. "You can't do this! You're just a man!" "No!" Richard shouted back, a rush of defiance filling him. "I am more than my mistakes. I am a father, a husband, a friend, and I choose to fight." The shadows howled as the light engulfed them, illuminating the space with a brilliance that could banish nightmares. With each pulse, Richard felt years of regret unravel. Despair turned to determination. Guilt transformed into righteousness. As the darkness splintered and shattered, Richard glimpsed Ethan near him. His son, his heart. The shadows didn't just flee. They transformed, unveiling the faces of people Richard had hurt, a reflection of his past he'd hidden away. Tears brimmed in Richard's eyes as he faced them. "I'm so sorry. I should have done better." The pain was real, but so was the power of acknowledgement. Then everything snapped back into focus. The air was clear, bright with the warmth of unbroken bonds. The shadows scattered, leaving Richard surrounded by love, by family. And just like that, his parents, Rachel and Solomon, stood together in the light. Their expressions were smiles, their energy lifting the burden from Richard's heart. The shadows had faded, but their lessons remained vivid. Ethan ran into Richard's arms, the baby nestled safely within his embrace. "We did it, Dad! We broke free!" Richard hugged him tight, tears of relief flowing down his cheeks. "Yes, we did." The world shimmered around them, alive with endless possibilities. A new beginning emerged. And in that moment, Richard knew this wasn't the end, but rather the start of a journey towards becoming the man he always wanted to be. The love he'd feared losing was there, ready to grow stronger than ever. They'd face whatever came next, together. But as they stood there, in the warmth of that miraculous light, an echo rang at the edge of Richard's awareness. A haunting sensation that told him this wasn't the end of mysteries yet to unfold. "What lies beyond?" he whispered, glancing at the horizon where shadows still lingered. waiting for another chance. Don't miss out. You must subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories that are coming your way. Click that like button now to feed the algorithm and help more people discover these incredible tales. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this ending, because we want to hear from you.